Thank you so much, Lorna, for that really warm introduction. It's great to see everyone, even though it's through a computer screen. And thank you so much to YouthLink for organizing this amazing conference. It sounds like yesterday was fantastic. There is a lot going on at the moment, and I know many of you will have been up late into the night following events across the Atlantic. These do feel, as Lorna said, like very unsettling times. In Europe, we've got conflicts in Ukraine, Armenia and Azerbaijan flaring up. In Belarus and Poland, mass protests to protect democracy and human rights. And here we've got Brexit, an increased risk of terrorism, ongoing concerns about climate change, and all in the middle of a global pandemic, which has had a disproportionate impact on young people and exacerbated existing inequalities. So it's all a bit depressing. But that's where you come in, because if there's a group of people who can bring excitement and joy and hope to a situation, it is youth workers and the youth work sector. And what I want to talk to you about today is your role as human rights work. Today is actually the 70th anniversary of the European Convention of Human Rights. We've just celebrated the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be celebrating the 31st anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and it's Youth Work Week. So it's a real call to action at the moment about what youth work can do to ensure that human rights for young people in Scotland is respected, protected and fulfilled, and to play a role as human rights defenders and to encourage young people to be human rights defenders. Because we need to confront and respond to the wave of racism, populism and violent language that we're seeing in the media. And we need to understand the impact that that's having on our children and young people. We need to reject human rights, anti-human rights ideas which have really entered mainstream political discourse. And we need to reaffirm our faith in universality and indivisibility of all human rights. That's how we ensure that young people's rights are at the center of everything that we do. So what you do as youth workers is human rights work, working alongside young people, right at the heart of the community, in the local authority and voluntary sectors, and importantly, making sure that young people have their voices heard. You help ensure that they're protected within a family environment of happiness and love and understanding, supporting their physical and mental health, supporting them access services. These are all important rights functions. And the special attention that you're able to give to those that are socially excluded, disabled children, care experienced children. And again, we're doing so much at the moment with the promise and building a whole new approach to how we support care experienced children. Those who are experiencing poverty, which we know has been not only disproportionately impacted through COVID, but was already a huge human rights issue. Black young people and young people of colour in Scotland, those with insecure immigration status, those receiving targeted services. But more broadly, the universal work that we do, or that you all do, to help children and young people meet their full potential. At school, not just school-based education, but so much of building on the purpose of education, being about developing children and young people to their fullest potential. So much of that happens outside of formal education systems, and the discussions we're having at the moment around the importance of outdoor education and the impacts of physical and mental health on that. So the work that you do is human rights work is my main message, and we're looking to you to be an important part of building the new human rights structures in Scotland, particularly through the incorporation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And making that meaningful. A couple of years ago, when the UN General Secretary launched the global UN Youth Strategy, he said that globalization, new technologies, displacement, shrinking civil spaces, changing labor markets and climate impacts were all putting huge pressure on young people everywhere, and pointed to the fact that 1/5 of young people weren't in employment, education or training, and many are affected by conflict. But they generally remain excluded from development programs. They're ignored in the way that we do things. And so that we're losing out on the vast source of innovation, ideas and solution that young people bring. And so this is something that's hugely important part of what we need to do in the future in Scotland, is making sure that young people's voices are at the heart of our decision making. And so much of what you do as youth workers can help deliver on that. I've got the best job in the world as Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland. I think some of you will have heard me say that before. Usually I get to spend a lot of my days working directly with children and young people in the real world or the physical world. I get to climb trees and play on the floor with paints and glitter and marching, and go camping, finding out what's happening in children and young people's lives. All of that work is done in partnership with youth workers. And I think that that's something that's really important part of the function that you do, and really important in human rights terms, because children and young people don't have the same power as adults. They don't have the same access to economic influence to change things, or they don't have the same access to systems of redress. And so therefore, it's incumbent on those in power to make sure that they take additional efforts to involve children and young people, but most decision makers don't have that skill set. And that's really strongly where you come in, because young people tell us consistently that they're frustrated by the challenge of the pace of political change, and political, legislative change can be very, very slow in a world that's changing very quickly with technology and social change. And the important role that you play alongside children and young people, supporting that their voices in decision-making is really important. And that needs to be set within a rights context. Young people have the right to be involved in decisions that affect them, not just directly in relation to their own lives, but in relation to decisions that affect the whole country. And I get to meet with thousands of children and young people across Scotland every year, which is amazing. And the really strong message that they consistently give is that they struggle to hold those in power to account. And a big part of my job as Children's Commissioner is to be that fierce champion for them. But what needs to happen in every community, in every setting, is young people need to be supported to be part of that change. And we've got a very exciting opportunity at the moment with the bill before Parliament to incorporate the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I know that YouthLink and many of you, through the work that you're doing, have been really involved in that. And this has been a hard year. And I know you talked about that last year and we were supposed to be looking forward, but I do want to mention it because I think one of the most difficult things for me is not being able to do some of that direct contact. And it's great that we're able to be online together today. And I've seen from the chat that we've got delegates from all across Scotland. And one of the advantages of using technology is that we can meet together without having to travel, but it's not the same. It's really not the same when we're talking about young people and children. I am quite enjoying aspects of it though. And I think one of the things that we need to do in future is make sure that we include some of this new digital learning, some of this way in which we're engaging with the world in our working going forward. Next weekend I'm attending the Northern Alliance Youth Conference. I've had the chance to meet with schools and young people's groups that I wouldn't usually be able to do when I was traveling around. So having that digital work as part of our skill set is really important. But also one of the things we've seen through COVID is digital inequality being made so much worse. In introducing the issue around the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I know many of you are very familiar with it, and I think someone's actually put in the link Kevin's really good piece blog on it in terms of linking the work that you already do and the opportunities that you have with incorporation. But what's important is to make sure that we understand is this is set within an international legal framework. And so 75 years ago, when the UN was created, it started with this idea that we had to reaffirm our faith in fundamental rights and dignity and worth of the human person, and to put in place all of the legal structures that we needed in order to make rights real. And over the last 70 years or so, we've put in place lots of different legal structures to make sure that our commitments to children and young people were met. And it covers everything from life and survival, being protected, which is a huge amount of the work that you do, but having that right to participate and be free to express and be part of change, And then really important service delivery like housing and social security and healthcare, and making sure that children and young people can access those as well. One of the first things I did as Children's Commissioner 3 years ago when I got this role was to travel around the country and ask children and young people what they wanted from their Children's Commissioner. And we've just published our annual report, and I was reflecting back on it, and I wanted to just quickly cover that with you, because when we pulled all of the different views of children and young people all around the country together, they said what they wanted their Children's Commissioner to be is someone with big ears for listening and having a good heart, to be generous, but to be stubborn, loud, enthusiastic, kind, clever, confident, and to care. So I think they actually wanted a youth worker rather than a lawyer, but I have been trying my best over the last few years. And I think that is really important, that linking that back, that really key point that youth work is human rights work. And it's about bringing that life to this, what can be quite intimidating and quite formal human rights structure, because human rights aren't intended to be words on paper. They're intended to cut right to the heart of human dignity. And I think that connection between the relationships that you are able to build with young people and the spaces you're able to create with young people, that's where human rights happens. And that helps us deliver on all of the obligations that we have to children and young people. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is really special. As I said, we're celebrating 31 years of it, and we now have a bill before Parliament that will bring it into domestic law. So this piece of international law, which brings together all of the different rights of children and young people, that's 31 years old. There have been rights that we know and are familiar with, but this law that's before Parliament will actually make that enforceable in Scotland. So that's the big change. And the Convention starts with the idea that children and young people should grow up in a family environment of happiness and love and understanding. And it builds on this international framework of inalienable rights, but recognizing that childhood and youth is entitled to special care and protection. And so the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the most rapidly and widely ratified international treaty in history. Every country in the world signed up to it, apart from one, and that's the country that we've all got our eyes on partly at the moment, for reasons that I'm not even going to go into. But it's a common international standard, and that's really important around the survival, development, protection, participation of children and young people. And so that's what we're talking about. And the great opportunity that we have with incorporation is that there's a commitment to fully and directly incorporating the UN Convention into domestic law. And that means we're going to take all of those rights and put them into our domestic law in a way that we can understand and use. And I think it's an amazing kind of bright ray of sunlight in what's been a really gloomy year. And I think it's something that we can all get behind and really work towards, not only making sure that we have the legal structures in place, but we can make them meaningful as well. And so one of the important things I suppose to recognize with the incorporation bill is that in many countries, this is automatic. In many countries, as soon as you sign up to an international law, it becomes part of your domestic law. But we actually have to go through an additional legal process. And the UK has been pretty slow to do that. But this is something where Scotland is leading the way. And so we're not leading the way internationally so much, but we are leading the way in the UK, and we're leading the way in countries like us, the English-speaking world, and particularly the kind of Commonwealth countries have been very slow to do this. So that's something that's really exciting. And what the bill will do will be to make it unlawful for public bodies to act incompatibly with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so that means it's a legal obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill all of those rights. And so it comes on the back of decades of campaigning from many of you who are on this conference today, and lots of years of international experts engaging as well. And so it's the first time that the Scottish Parliament will bring an international treaty into our domestic law in this way. So that's hugely, hugely exciting. And it's going to bring benefit to all children and young people, but the ones whose rights are most at risk will benefit most. because the Convention on the Rights of the Child requires government to give special attention to disabled children, care experienced children, those that need protection, those whose rights are most at risk. And it requires the state to use all available resources to the maximum extent possible to deliver on those rights. And so particularly things like mental health services, but also education, also other elements of healthcare. So youth work being right at the heart of this, because we know that all of the work that you're doing is so beneficial to the fulfillment of children's rights. The convention incorporation will allow additional levers to get budgetary focus on these things. We'll have to change the way in which we allocate budgets. We'll have to take a rights-based approach to that. And I think that youth work and the children's rights work more generally is very well placed to make very strong arguments around budgeting there. There's also going to be, there's going to be an ability to then take public authorities to court if they don't fulfill children's rights, which is really exciting. But what we've seen in countries that have already incorporated the UNCRC is that that's not really the point of it. The point of it is much more to deliver culture change. And so by using things like children's rights budgeting and impact assessments and changing the way in which decisions are made, that's where we're going to see the real value, and particularly the value on these early supportive services that youth workers and others can deliver that we know make huge economic sense as well. And so one of the big things that I'm looking forward to seeing change is around the culture change, and particularly around the way in which we set up the mechanisms for decision making and budgeting. So I think that's hugely important. We're not there yet with incorporation. While there is broad parliamentary support for it, we've still got to get it passed. We are near the end of a parliamentary session. So the voices of young people and the voices of youth workers are going to be really essential in getting this bill over the line. And that's really important. So there's an opportunity here for human rights leadership. And I think YouthLink has already shown a great skill at providing that human rights leadership. And I know that many of you have been working really effectively on that. But now is a really important time for influence, that making sure that people understand that this isn't tokenistic, this is actually real law, and will make a really big difference to children and young people. And the scheme that will need to be created around children's rights, I think provides a really good opportunity for implementation. I'm going to move on now, I'm aware of time, to talk a little bit about acting as human rights defenders, because I think this is something that we should really be celebrating in Scotland. And I know that some of the young people who have been involved in this conference and who will be moderating the panel later today are some of the most impressive young human rights defenders I've ever seen. And it's been a big focus of UN, particularly the Committee on the Rights of the Child has focused on the role of human rights defenders, both children and young people as human rights defenders, but also adult human rights defenders working alongside them is really important. But it's important to recognize that children and young people have always been acting as human rights defenders. And it's not just that adults need to pay attention, it's adults need to actually change the way that we do things in response to them. Being a human rights defender isn't just about the kind of adults in faraway places. It isn't just about the kind of the work that journalists and protesters do. It's about making sure that human rights are promoted and protected in small places as well. And I think the work that you do as youth workers is really important. There's an important distinction, I suppose, in terms of the audience here, and that you're all human rights actors, you're all doing really important human rights work. And so when you deliver children's rights and services as part of a public function, you're a duty bearer, and that's a hugely essential human rights role. So that important function of respecting children's rights, not interfering with them, making sure that children are given proper support, but also protecting children's rights and a lot of the child protection work that you do, and fulfillment of children's rights, delivering on those important things. And so the important role of a duty bearer is an important human rights function, which many of you do. And then in addition to that, those outside of public service delivery can act as human rights defenders. And so that's promoting and protecting children's rights and young people's rights, and challenging and demanding change. And so many of you are doing both of those functions. And that equally important. And that's why I think it is useful that in Scotland, we often use the term unfeirties, developed by the Children's Parliament. I know many of you here today are unfeirties, and that covers both of those functions within human rights terms. And so I think that what's really important as we look to the opportunities provided by incorporation, and what's really important as we look to challenge and demand change in response to these global crises that we're going through, that your role and the role that you're able to support children and young people to do as human rights defenders, as human rights actors, is absolutely essential. And so I'm going to leave you, I suppose, with that thought, that what you do as youth workers is human rights work, whether it's delivering some of those functions in terms of respecting, protecting, and fulfilling rights, or whether it's acting as a human rights defender, and particularly when it is encouraging and supporting children and young people to be human rights defenders. That is what makes being in Scotland at the moment so exciting, despite everything that's happening and all the challenges that face us at the moment. Scotland is an amazing place to be right now, and you are all doing an incredible job, and it's an incredible privilege to be Children's Commissioner right here, right now, and being able to work with you. So I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion later today, and thank you very much for listening.